With us today, we have Jock Busuttil. Hello, Jock. Can you hear me?
I certainly can. Let me just start my video as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Hello.
Good morning, Jock.
Good
You are
morning.
working with product people all around the world, and you're based in the UK. What do you see when you work with these product people? You've also been writing a book on product management.
Yeah.
How do people evolve in their roles as product management? How do you do that? And how?
So I think the main way people evolve was as they get more experienced, they can either take on more complex products or they can take on larger numbers of products. And that's kind of a show of their technical development as a product manager. But to show their kind of personal development as a product manager as well, one of the most important things I would do with my teams would be to ensure that as people got more senior, they took on more responsibility for sharing their experience with the rest of the community. So in other words, they took on more of a coaching or a mentoring role alongside their hands-on product management. And I think that regardless of your job title, even if you're just starting out, there's a role every product manager can play in sharing their experiences with other people within the product management community. And as you get more senior, that only becomes more of a practice.
Wonderful. I think that's a great thought. I think whenever when trying to teach or trying to share your experience, then you really need to reflect on your knowledge. And I think that reflection of your knowledge is really something that is we all benefit from, whether we do it in training classes or either on teaching other ones, which might be the best way of learning something. But also there is something that you want to share with us today, Jock, around what is it that we want to improve within. Then we also need to measure. We need to measure our work and how well are we doing this. So Jock Busuttil, author, speaker, founder of Product People in the UK, just between London and Cambridge. The screen is yours, and I would like you to share your thoughts on how do we measure product management.
Perfect.
Let's see if you make your screen seen.
There we go. Can you see me, everyone?
Yes, we can see the screen perfectly. Thank you.
Excellent. Good. Well, thank you very much for letting me come and speak this morning, Magnus. I'm going to talk about how we measure product management. So let me just, you know who I am, so we don't need to see this. My book is there on my website if you're interested. And I believe, Magnus, you'll be making the sketch notes, the sort of graphic representation of these slides available after, as usual, on the newsletter. So let me tell you about this story then. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I was head of product for the UK's Ministry of Justice digital team. And yes, maybe it's still a little bit strange for government departments to have digital teams, but now it's fairly commonplace, at least here in the UK. So within my team, we had 12 product managers, and they had differing levels of experience. Each of these product managers had their own multidisciplinary team. So they had a product manager, they had user researchers, designers, developers, delivery managers, which is kind of another way of saying Scrum Masters, but with any discipline, not just Scrum. And other roles would come into the team as needed. So, a nice autonomous, multidisciplinary team that were empowered to build product. Now, while this happened all quite a while ago and things have changed since those days, at the time, the senior management team was really struggling with the idea of a kind of a flat organization. And so they kept trying to reassert a command and control structure, a top-down structure to the organization. And, that was very much kind of to reflect the way in which government and the civil service works. So they're struggling a little bit with this flat hierarchy. And so we have this team that's, thriving on autonomy, really responsible to achieve the goals with their product and to solve user problems. And they have this kind of conflict a little bit with senior management. So senior management are there trying to cut costs. They're looking at these teams. We've got 12 product managers, we've got 12 teams. At the moment, we need to cut costs a little bit. So what they asked me to do was to create what's called a stack rank. a terrible idea. Which was essentially a way of ranking all of the product managers in order of performance, so that the worst ones essentially would be fired. Okay, and this is a terrible idea for a whole variety of reasons. Now, my team was diverse. They're all strong performers, and a stack rank is a way of really devaluing people who are used to working autonomously. It turns them into a commodity and not something of value. It ignores their experience, the individuality of their skills and their approaches, and it kind of constrains. It's a very reductive way of pulling everything down to a single measure of measurement, a single dimension of measurement. And even if it was possible to kind of pull, and rank all these people on just a single measurement, the team would rightly object to it and would probably just leave on principle, which was terrible. And you have to bear in mind that at the time, recruiting someone would take at least 6 months just due to the slowness of the processes and the security vetting and that kind of thing. Whereas at the time with the contractors, if one of them left, they could literally leave the next day. So, it's a very difficult thing to kind of make sure there's enough people available at the right times. So they were all product managers. They each did product management differently. And that's what I really needed them to do, because they were all solving different user problems. So I was being pushed by senior management to measure performance. I couldn't refuse to do it completely. All that happened is they'd get rid of me, replace me with someone who didn't care as much, and then they'd rank my team and fire the bottom 30% anyway. So what would serve my team better as their head of community was by mostly doing what senior management wanted, but in a way that made it really, really hard for them to actually rank my team. So this is the system of measurement I came up with. I called it a talent map. Now, what this means is, I'll take you through what we're going to do. So step one was to sit down with my team, and in one of our weekly meetings, we discussed what was going on. I gave them the pressures that we were under, discussed the need for cost cutting, but also discussed with them how it was so important for me to show that actually a stack rack wasn't possible. So what we did was we discussed the dimensions how we were going to measure product management performance. So we discussed what were the most important skills a product manager needs. And we had 3 groups of these skills. We had the emotional or soft or people skills that we sometimes think about. We had the technical skills like product road mapping or prioritization or that kind of thing. And then we had other disciplines, so not necessarily part of product management, but the ones that we need to have an understanding of to be able to have sensible conversations with our multidisciplinary team. So we need to understand a bit about design. We need to be, understand enough about user research to have a conversation with our user researcher, but we're not necessarily expert in doing those things ourselves. And so these 3 sets of skills we used as our metrics. Next step was for each of my team, so each of the product managers, to do a quick survey to assess their own experience. And what they were going to do was to score each of their skills honestly out of 5. So 0, no experience of that. 5, they were an expert. 3 was kind of in the middle and they were okay. And what we did was then I plotted the results, averaged off the team, and compared the individual results to the team averages, and then shared those results back with just the individuals. I only shared the team averages with the whole team, as it were. So each individual got to see their own little report. And this was really interesting. We'll look into kind of some of the ways we can see this, but it became very clear where they felt they were stronger and where they felt they were weaker. And this was really useful for sort of coaching later on. But also a really interesting thing happened. When the team realized that some people were, needed help in certain areas, or when they realized that they were reasonably expert in certain areas, what they would do is they'd work together to start filling in the gaps of their colleagues. So they would start to share their experience. So if somebody was more experienced in, say, Kanban, then they would buddy up with people who were less experienced in Kanban and share that knowledge. Similarly, if somebody decided that they were not as great at public speaking as maybe they could have been, then they took on more responsibility for putting themselves forward to do more speaking engagements. So this was all really valuable so far, but we had even more interesting stuff to learn. So the step 3 was we asked the delivery teams, so the actual multidisciplinary team that worked with the product managers, to rate how they thought the product manager was doing. And this was anonymous. And so what I was interested in was the subjective perception. Okay, so this isn't, objective in any way. This is literally just opinion. But I wanted to see where the product manager and the teams were in agreement. So they both thought that the product manager was strong in a particular area or weak in a particular area. But also, it was kind of interesting where the product manager rated themselves weak at something, but the team rated them as strong, or the other way around, because this led to useful areas for further investigation. And then the last step was to run the same exercise, but this time at the top of the organization with the senior managers. And this brought me to a very quick conclusion, which was that with some exceptions, it was clear that senior managers had absolutely no idea how to answer the question. They just didn't know what product managers did. And so they were not really close enough to the product managers to make any kind of sensible assessment. And for me, this was a dual failing. This was a failing of the senior management team, who were supposed to be closer to our team than they were in practice. But also it was a point of improvement for the product managers, who should have been better at stakeholder management and should have been putting themselves closer to the senior management team. Because bear in mind, in government in particular, to keep things moving, we absolutely needed to have the stakeholders, the senior management team on board with what we were doing. So it was very, very important to have good stakeholder management with that team. So the lesson we learned was invest more time in stakeholder management. So this led to the personal development plan. So when we got all these results together, I actually got an example for you here. First of all, it's anonymized. There was no product manager called Petra on my team, so there's no problem with sharing any of this. But this was the kind of thing that I would use to keep track with my one-to-one coaching sessions with each of my product managers. And we'd have one of these for each quarter and update it every quarter. So at the top, you can see the date. We can see the section about the individual's goals. And this is what they want to achieve by when. Okay, you could use OKRs for this if you wanted to. It's the same kind of idea. But the idea being it's a goal, it's an outcome we're looking for. Then we have the column which says how we're going to achieve this. And this is some ideas that we come up together with in our one-to-one coaching sessions. And then to keep track of progress, we have what they're doing to achieve this. And this is a way just to keep a quick summary of what they're going on, how they're doing as we go along each session. And then we've got the individual graphs. We saw these briefly earlier, but you can see how we can identify potential areas to work on in one-to-one coaching sessions. So in this particular case, the person, Petra, has decided that she's lacking a bit of focus, lacking a bit of motivation, and maybe a bit of patience in the soft skills. And so these are things that we could work on in the coaching session. We go through kind of the different assessments by self-assessment, by senior management, and by the delivery team. And then we go on to the technical skills. And then in the self-assessment here, we've got an opportunity, because Petra is particularly good at metrics, to share knowledge with the rest of the team. And again, there's some potential areas around product vision, business case that might be worth exploring in one-to-one sessions to develop further. So this is really good, because very quickly you can see what the topics need to be to ensure that we're developing our product managers well. And then when we get onto the sort of the pink ones, what you can see are these are the skills that are related to product management, but not actually product management themselves. So user research, writing copy, information security, development, design. So things that we're not expecting them to be expert in. So we're expecting the graph to be a bit smaller, but it is kind of interesting to pull out situations where individuals do have a special skill, alongside the product manager that maybe we can draw on as we need to. So, what were the results? Well, nobody got fired, so my objective was achieved. And I wasn't just being sentimental or overprotective. I think the cost-cutting exercises at the time were short-sighted. it didn't take into account the amount of work the team was being tasked with, and indeed how much we saw coming down the line. Because bear in mind, we were a lot closer to the roadmap, and we could see the projects that were coming down the pipeline. So bearing in mind that you could get rid of a freelancer in a matter of days, but recruiting a replacement would take 6 months, even if it was quiet right now, we were going to have suddenly 3 new projects pop out of the woodwork, and they'd be approved without warning, or suddenly we'd be understaffed again. So it was really, really important for me to make sure that we had a sufficiently good number of product managers available to do things. So 5 things we can learn from this exercise. So first of all, people performance is multidimensional. Product management is a generalist role requiring multiple skills, which means you need to look at different aspects, different areas of performance when you're assessing this. And to be honest, if you look at other roles other than product management, you realize they're multidimensional too. So we can't just go and, pull out one metric and say everyone is going to be stack ranked on this particular measure. The second thing is stack ranks are such a devaluing thing to do to people. It's really reductive. And if you do have high performing people in any discipline, attempting to do this, to put people in this kind of competitive state with one another, is going to be really devaluing for them. And if they're sensible enough, they'll probably either game the system to make sure that they get a really, really high score in that single metric, or they'll leave because it's a system they don't want to work within. You want a diverse team because people have different strengths and weaknesses, and that's okay. User problems are not all identical, so you want a mixture of personalities, experience, and abilities in your team to be able to tackle them in different ways. This is also the reason why I'm so keen to make sure that people recruit product managers from any market sector, not just the one they happen to be in, that they're looking for a role in. So, if you're working in automotive and you can apply that to analytics, or if you're working in healthcare and you can apply that to developing APIs, then I think this background, this different perspective that people have is really, really valuable, and actually something to look for rather than to try and recruit out. Of course, the whole purpose of the exercise is to spot opportunities to improve. The product managers could assess themselves and identify their own areas to develop. And of course, I could help them in the coaching sessions, but also the opportunities to share knowledge and experience with their peers. There's such a power in peer learning. So this was a really valuable exercise, and we didn't see gaps in experience as failings. We saw them as opportunities to grow. And last of all, don't forget to think about your storytelling. If you have data to tell a story, good graphs have power, have conversational power. It's never a waste of time to spend a bit more effort making your statistics easier to consume, particularly to people who just want to find out what the story is. So for me to tell that story back to senior management about the strengths and weaknesses of my team, these graphs were really, really, really useful. So there's a toolkit available on my website. It's all licensed under Creative Commons, so you're free to reuse it. You need to attribute it to product people, and you can't sell it or make money from it because that's not the point. But you are free to use it and apply that to your own teams if you wish to, or indeed just to yourself.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jock. Let's do the digital clap for Jock and see how many claps we're getting today for Jock. Let's do the clap. We have some. Hello, Torgel. I didn't see you before. Thank you very much, Jock, for sharing your thoughts. What was interesting is, of course, that you used the name Petra. This is also one of our colleagues.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure
It definitely
sure
Petra wasn't on my
try
queue.
to math it. I'm not sure if it did.
I'm very sorry, Petra, if you're listening. I wasn't intending to do that.
Well, you'll have to send that over, and we'll need to have a personal self-assessment on Petra to make sure that it fits. What was interesting, what we've also found, we do similar setups also when doing self-assessment, and both of the product managers and also with the stakeholders when we do these activities to measure and assess product management activities. And we have the same result as you do, that most of the time that the stakeholders are actually give a higher grade to a lot of the skills than the product managers themselves do. I could see that on your examples as well. Was that just on these example, or was that something that you found as a pattern in your survey?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So one of the soft skills, I think, if you were eagle-eyed enough to see it, one of the soft skills is humility, because we reckon, or we as a team reckoned that a lack of ego, a sense of humility is very, very important to a product manager. And of course, this has the double-edged effect of product managers being absolutely terrible about talking about how good they are when they're in coaching sessions or in review sessions, or trying to get a pay rise. So sometimes we need to be a little less humble. And we need to say, actually, I'm quite good at these things. But essentially, yeah, it was across the board that most of the way around, the team was saying, oh, I'm not so good at these things. When actually everyone around going, what are you saying? You're brilliant. Don't.
Interesting. I think that's almost to some extent a personality of a lot of the product managers that
absolutely
we are hardworking, gritty individuals, and we know what we can improve. So since we're looking for that improvement, we're always judging ourselves maybe a little bit harsher than the environment is doing.
Absolutely. I think it's important to be self-aware. And I think that, if people, I don't think arrogant product managers work very well.
You got a point there. A question here. When you do these assessments, what do you do if you get a new member or if you learn new things? How often would you need to do these assessments that you shared with a bit? Typically once a year that you normally do in these kind of areas, or once every one when you have new consultants coming in?
It kind of depends. So with every new person, I'd make sure that we did one with every person on the team, so that we had something, because remember, we're using these on a weekly basis for one-to-one coaching sessions. So I needed to have a sense of where to develop these individuals. But in terms of doing the overall survey, I think maybe no more than, maybe once or twice a year. So maybe once every 6 months at most, because the things aren't going to shift that much that quickly. And also you need to give them a couple of quarters, but they've got stuff to do. They've got products to manage. You need to give them a chance to actually have the time to work on those skills and get better at them. And I think if you're measuring it too often, you won't see the incremental change. Whereas if you leave a decent gap between the big assessments, then you'll be able to say, look, before you thought you were pretty bad at public speaking, but now you've had a chance to do 6 different talks in the time, and now you're feeling a lot more confident about it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much again for sharing, Jock, on measuring and assessing product management. And I think that both doing the self-assessment and having stakeholder assessment and combine those things and put them on some type of scale, I think that's a great way of doing it, and it helps a lot in doing it. Of course, it's difficult to identify what really to measure here and the scales, and those you can find on the Jocks, and we'll share those also in the ProductBeats community, where we'll have the graphical recording by Fia that we share that afterwards, along with the presentation from Jock and our reflections. In the chat, I wrote down I posted a link to the upcoming speakers. So there's a long list of speakers till October right now. I think we have the list is public of all the speakers till October. However, next week we're having vacation. Next week is our first Tuesday when we're not having a session. So I'm sorry for that. I hope you're able to cope 1 week without the ProductBeats webinar. Good luck with that. And I thank you all for listening in today, and wish you all a great vacation. For those of you who are now going on vacation, make use of the vacation. Read the book Grit or Peak, or maybe buy the book from Jock and get some good summer reading and reach next level of high performance. Thank you very much. Enjoy your Tuesday. And thanks again, Jock.
You're welcome.
Take
Thank
care.
you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.